Summer Soiree block number 3 is our guest list. Who are you going to have to your summer soiree? What kind of people will you invite? What kind of ages will they be? What will their interests be? All of those fun things are what you think about when you have a party, because you have to have guests. I just thought this block turned out super cute, and I want to show you. Here's the pattern. Here's the one sheet that I do for those of you who don't like to read directions. So this is super easy. I thought that would be nice to have as the third block. And if you put it in repeat, it is so good. Look, 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 look. This is fabulous. Can you see taking all different red scraps and then maybe all different blue scraps and that sort of summery light blue and making this quilt from all your scraps? Yes, somebody do that and sew it up for me so I can see. Now in our Whiskey in a Teacup book, there is a whole section on inviting guests. There's the subtle art of dinner parties, this section here where Reese Witherspoon talks about the tips that came from her grandmother, Dorothea. I don't even know how you pronounce that, Dorothea. So she has the tips that came, like, I love this one because it says to have a whole variety of ages in your party for, conversation wise. I think that's really cool because we as quilters, when we're in a quilt community, whether you're in the online group or someplace else, there is definitely a range of types of people, locations of people, interests of people, ages of people. So that's what makes the environment so much fun, is that not everybody is the same, and it makes for great conversation and a great mix of quilts. The same thing for a party. If you have a nice mix, like on my particular street, my cul-de-sac, we have people from a young couple that just had a baby to our 80-year-olds that are long retired. So, this would be a great party to have where you could just have a cul-de-sac party. I've been thinking about that. I thought that would be super cool. Maybe next summer I'll plan for that and enlist one of the other neighbors to help me. So today I want to focus on not that block in particular because I think that's pretty easy. I want to focus on the sew and flip techniques, because I want to give you some more tips on that. I had tips last Wednesday, but I want to do another set of tips. So here we go. I want everybody to be able to do a sew and flip successfully 99% of the time, because honestly, it's fabric and it shifts and it moves, and sometimes it's not, you're going to have that 1% of the time when it's not going to work. But I want you to be successful, and I have a few tips for that. Even though today's block for the summer soiree is not a sew and flip, there are more coming, and plus lots and lots of projects use sew and flip because it's easy to give you the extra design elements. All right, so let's look at this. First tip is, if you've never done this, and I don't honestly do this part very often, but it helps a lot of people. So I'm going to tell you, is you could starch your fabric before you cut your shapes out. That will give the fabric a little bit of firmness, which might help you keep that crisp edge while you're working. So I'm using just from the grocery store, Niagara, that's what I use. And here's one that's been sprayed with starch and dried, and here's one that's not, so that you can see it's much more sort of pliable. And this has like you can see it's keeping the shape, it's keeping that firm shape. Now I haven't pressed it, which I would do next before I would cut the shapes. When I starch, I spray it so it's wet, and then I let it dry. Press it and then cut your shapes. All right, so let's look at a few tips. First, if you have my triangle book, there's a section in there for sew and flip. There's also a section in there for directional fabric when you're doing things that you sew and flip. So 2 great tips in this book. You're going to be sewing from corner to corner for sew and flip and then pressing it over. So there's a few things to be successful with that, because ultimately what's going to happen is that this square, the whole unit that you're working with, no matter how many of these you do, like on block 2 we had them stacked, so there was another one like this, no matter how many, the the size of this shape stays the same. It should never change. You aren't going to get a bigger or a smaller shape. It will stay the same. All right, so first let me just do this one. So I'm for block number 2, these are the shapes for block 2, which I'm going to show you. This is a 6.5 and square, and then this was whatever it was, 4.5. So to go end to end, I can draw a line. So I can draw it while it's sitting right on the fabric. It doesn't matter. I'm going to use one of these iron out pens. I'm drawing on the back side where you're never going to see this. So you're going to draw, you can draw your line from point to point, and that will be the line that you focus on when you're sewing. There you go. There is another method if you don't want to draw on your fabric, or that's just not something you're that keen on. You can go ahead and press it. So here is a pressed line. So I just folded the square in half and I have a pressed line. And you want to be sure then that you're, exactly where you want to be on that line. Now sewing it is where the next part comes in. It can be a little tricky for people because when you sew, you're then going to fold this in half, and that takes up a little space, the folding over. You'll hear people say, sew a thread away from the line. Now I did 2 examples here. One, let's do this one first. On this one, I'm going to get you in here nice and close. When I did this one, I actually sewed, I need more of the shape. I sewed just to the bigger side of that line. Sometimes I was right on it, sometimes I was more over here on this side of it. And what that did was cause a problem. So that when I just even finger press this over, you can see it is too small. This needs to come right out to the edge, and it's too small. Here's the problem that some people have, is they will do this, you will sew it, and then what you will do is without checking, you won't do this, without checking, you will just trim off this part and press it open. And if visually, you won't see that extra part there. Because it's been cut away, right? So that part's been cut away, and you're like, oh, it looks great. But in reality, it's like 1/8 of an inch short. It's short. Okay, that's part. Let me just show you this here. Here's one where I sewed it to the smaller side, to the outside. I call this the outside. So I sewed right to this side of the line, the smaller side. And when I finger press it open, it actually comes and meets perfectly. I can even flip it over and see that it's not extending out. That would be another problem. If you sewed it kind of weird, it would extend out here. So the whole thing is when you sew on that line, practice what works for you, press it open like this, and check. When you press it open, is it too short? That's not good. Press it open, were it to be too long, you can't tell from this side, but if you flip it over and it looked like this, like it was a little bit too long, like it came past, that's also not good. When you flip it over, it should be even, and on the front, it should be even. And that will give you a very successful sew and flip. And that's just the sew and flip part. Now, for the block, we did our Summer Soiree block 2, we had to match them up. And I am going to show you these 4 units together with the 2 stacked and how I match them. The next most important part with getting these is the pressing so that you can nestle them together. And I think there's a couple steps here that if you don't do them, it introduces issues. We don't want issues. So first of all, let me show you again that when you put the second layer of squares down, when you're layering, then you still have to check and go to the back here and be sure there's nothing overhanging, and being sure on the front you come right to the edge. And then I'm just going to use scissors to trim off this part so that we can do the pressing. All right, got that off of there. If I look at the back of these, right now and lay it out like it'll be, but you're looking at it from the back side, I have them all pressed the same way. They're all pressed down here. Now if I'm going to try to sew these, that means I have extra seams. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seams all together. I want to balance those out so that I have this set of seams going this way, and then I can nestle them more easily. So on this particular block, I'm going to press the seams the opposite direction that they are right now and get nice hot steam on there. And then on this opposite block, I will do the same. Press that and press the longer one. Okay. Remember, all these squares are still 6.5 inches. The size of the block does not change as you build it out. It stays the same. All right, so I have these ready to pin together. They're going to go right sides together, and I'm going to be pinning. So these intersections nestle together. So there we go. The seams are opposite and they're nestled together. And I am going to pin. I will use a unicorn pin because that will be good luck, don't you think? And I will just pin it so that when I go to sew, there isn't any shifting. The same one here. These need to be together. So if there's a little bit that needs eased in for some reason, if you weren't exactly 100%, then you're pinning and you can, sort of pull it to get it eased in if that were to be your issue. Okay, so now I have them pinned. I'm at the machine. Everything is just as I had it at the ironing station. So I'm going to just go through here with a 1/4 inch seam and not sew over the pins. That's so important. I know we get kind of, I don't know, daring maybe is the word. We get daring and then we're going to sew over the pins. It's like, oh no, please don't. You'll mess up your machine someday and be unhappy you did that. And take a look at the intersection. I have to press it, but it looks pretty darn good. There we go. So I've got the 2 sections done, and this is pressed to the top, this one is pressed to the bottom, and then once again, these are opposite each other. So it'll be just like when we did this one here with pinning. I'll be pinning all of these and sewing them together to get our final block. Here it is all together, and I want to show you the back so that you can see how it all played out. So here are the seams pressed this way and then the opposing seams that way, so that when I sewed these 2 units together, they could nestle up really nicely. Same thing on this side, pressed towards the center, pressed towards the outside. And then that way, every time I went to sew them together, they were all nestled really wonderfully. And I think it came out super good. Now, some of you might be super critical of your own work, and I'd say, just take a step back and look at it. This is just a sample block, so I might still go ahead and put those outer corners on it like the original one. Yes, it is time for you to write up your guest list for your summer soiree and see, here you go. See, here you're going to invite, make up your block, and then somebody go and do this. Somebody start sewing this one. I don't want it to have to be me. I love you. Mwah. See you online.